r/AskReddit. Survivors of comas, what was it like? If you want to join my giveaway for $500, subscribe and you will be automatically entered. I was in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks. All I remember is what it's like when they start pulling you out. I was having very vivid and strange dreams mixed with reality. Then one day I was able to recognize it was now September, but I remembered entering the hospital in August. I woke up in the hospital 3 days after an unintentional overdose of opiates and benzos. I remember projectile vomiting in my apartment, then waking up 3 days later with my girlfriend by my side. She showed up to find me unresponsive and barely breathing on my couch. As far as the coma itself goes, it was basically like falling asleep and waking up 3 days later. It was initially very confusing. I unfortunately didn't stop using drugs for another year and a half. Edit. Just a clarification, I woke up in the hospital with my girlfriend by my side. I was out for 2.5 days from an unintentional overdose, aka why the pharmacy always asks if you have any questions about that pill nowadays. I have no memory for about a day after waking up, but my family said I had some pretty rough things to say after my eyes opened. 0/10 would not recommend. The worst thing. Emo is the atrophy that happens while you're not moving. I was in a coma for a month and had to build my muscles up to be able to walk and climb steps again. I think I made it from my door to the next one the first time they got me out of bed. And I cried because of the mixture of physical and mental pain. The first time I tried to climb a flight of stairs, I just went at it like normal and was exhausted before coming close to the top. The rehab person had to explain to me that for now it was getting both feet on the step before going for the next one, like how old people climb stairs. It ended up taking over a year before my body was anywhere close to normal. I also had this skin peeling on my hands and feet shortly after I woke up. My cousin was hit by a car when he was in his early teens and was in a coma for about 6 weeks. He's in his late 20s now. He lives in a group home. Has the mental capacity of a child. Is prone to often violent fits of rage and has very little impulse control. He cannot work a normal job. He will never be able to live alone. He cannot live at home because of his violent rages, not his fault, and will never have a normal life. Comas aren't like the movies. Brain damage is a bitch. I fell into a coma after I got very drunk. Fell over. Cracked my head and had a bleed on my brain, had the last rites said as well. I was out for about 21 hours or so. I remember nothing of the coma. Just woke up with no recollection of what happened. Was a mixture of very confused, disorientated and had a standard shitty hangover. I was about 7 when it happened. I was playing around on a swing and apparently fell over and hit my head, also swallowed my tongue in the process. Fortunately, people around were quick to react. Somebody reached down my throat and took out my tongue and called an ambulance. I don't really remember it all that. I just remember waking up at the hospital the next day. My mother was standing next to me and as I woke up she started asking me questions like about what my name was or what her name was. I remember being really confused. I was like, "Mum, what sort of silly question is that?" Turns out I've woken up at some point in the ambulance and had no idea who my mum and dad were, as they were in the ambulance with me. Definitely not a fun experience. But the worst part was that the doctors said I couldn't eat chocolate for like a month after that. Not one. But my cousin was in one for a month. He woke up, looked around and began to scream like a lunatic, and saying someone's name. However, after that day of waking up he didn't remember a single thing. The name he was screaming was Anna, and no one there knew who Anna was. The doctors believe it was a deep coma dream. He spent 3 weeks after that shaking. He had a lot of issues walking properly and forming more than 2 sentences without stuttering like crazy. I'm very close with him. And when I ask him about Anna, his mood changes drastically and all he says is I don't wanna talk about it. Pursuing it further would make him break down crying or make him scream at you. He's a lot better now. Other than when he's asked who Anna was. Edit. Before people ask. His coma was a result of a car accident. I don't remember the coma itself. I was conscious and then I woke up with my mom sitting next to me. Nothing in between. When I woke up, I assumed I was at home. Why would my mom be sitting next to my bed? Wait. This isn't my bed. Wait. Is this a hospital room? When did I get to the hospital? Why am I in a hospital? Why am I in pain? I was pretty much panicking here. Eventually, everything was explained to me and I calmed down. I had rolled my truck and hit my head 9 days prior. So, coma itself was ?10. Waking up after was pi/10. Would not recommend. I was in a coma for 2 weeks and my family was told to start making arrangements. My wife and my 3 boys, all adults, were with me around the clock. I don't remember anything at all. But later, much later, when I made it through and was out of the hospital, I didn't feel like listening to music. Especially the Beatles or Zeppelin as well as some other which are my favorites and I have playlists for all my different moods. It made me depressed and angry. We all had gotten together and I was told that. Shit, now I crying. My family played these playlists non-stop. The thing is, I always have some music on and as far back as I can remember into my youth, I've had something always playing. Or at concert. Searching for new music. I'm now back, 2 years later, to listening to most of my favorites but not with the same excitement. I met a guy who was in an accident and spent 3 months in a coma. He said he spent 5 years in his mind, got his shit together and got married. Then he woke up a paraplegic after applying restraints to objects in the flatbed of a truck. In a coma for 42 days. I don't remember a thing. I was out about 13 days. Don't recall too much. But there were dreams that had familiar faces and places but not structured like an event so much. However, when I awoke the most difficulty I had to deal with was finding a way to resolve the lost time. My father survived recently a cardiac arrest. He was in a coma for almost a week. When he was strong enough to talk, we asked him what does he remember. He said he remembers being wheeled constantly to different parts of the hospital. Endless doors. Constantly being wheeled in. Most likely it's a recurring scene of him in the ER as docs were trying to revive him. He was completely out for around 3-4 days and would wake up sporadically for the remainder of the week until he was finally released from ICU. We asked him if he saw any door or white light. Tunnel stuff. He said nope. Just doctors bustling around him. It was bizarre. Last thing I remember was the respiratory tech came into my general floor hospital room to give me a treatment. Next thing I know she is calling and the floor nurses say we have to get her to ICU now. Someone said we need doctor's orders and the tech said I don't care, we are going now. 7 days later the breathing tube is removed and I start coming to reality. The first day I was so out of it I thought Oprah had found a cure for cancer. I also for some reason decided to attack a nurse, tried to run and promptly fell face first into a counter. I broke my nose. The weeks following were very strange. I developed a fear of falling asleep and had mild hallucinations. All in all 0/10 recommend. If there is poop caked onto the side of the bowl you try and piss it off. I was out for a week. After might be. Have zero memory of anything. Just a giant 404 error. It was absolutely beautiful. Well, the near-death experience. Mine was only like 3 days. It was pretty surreal coming back and then immediately very depressing after experiencing that peacefulness. Messed me up really bad for at least a year and still not who I was anymore. I was in a medically induced coma for a week or two. Back in 2008. After going through a 22-hour surgery to remove the tumor from my abdominal area. I ended up spending about 3 months in the surgical ICU recovering from that. Before being sent upstairs for 3 more months in the hospital receiving chemotherapy. I still have PTSD today from my time in the ICU. A big part of it was something called ICU delirium. Basically, it's when the bright, always on, lights, constant beeps and odd combinations of medicines mess with your systems and, basically, make you temporarily crazy. I still remember the hallucinations I had there more vividly than dreams I had this week. Ugh. Was out for 48 hours. I don't remember anything. It was like a time warp where I closed my eyes and then opened them and 2 days passed. How do I know I'm not in one right now? And yeah, my brain messing with me? Like a deep sleep. My parents brought me to HTE hospital with high fever. The doctor gave penicillin, which it turns out I'm allergic to. I woke up next day with no memories of the night. I woke up in the hospital room. Was confused for a few minutes. Had cancer as a kid. One night I had a fever of 105 plus. So obviously had to head to the hospital. I remember waking up and seeing my mom, and I had met up with my dad at a gas station. He works nights and his office was on the way. Then I remember going into the hospital and getting an IV. Then waking up hella confused and attached to a bunch of weird machines 3 days later. Ate some food. Knocked out again for 4 more days. Apparently I had some virus causing fluid around my brain. Totally could have died. And my brain's reaction was to go unconscious. When I woke up the last time, I somehow felt pretty normal. Got the IV taken out. And went home later that day. It felt like almost no time passed. Super weird. Had a major open heart surgery. Almost died and went into a 2-week coma after resuscitation. Being in the coma felt like sleeping soundly tbh. Had an endless series of random dreams. The last dream I had before waking up was that I was riding escalators for way too long. So long that I even thought to myself in the dream, that's strange. Why aren't I waking up? I completely misread this and was wondering what the fuck did the Comas do. There's an old Reddit post about a guy who was in college and was walking and tripped on a curb or something and hit his head. He was in a coma for a very short amount of time. Like 10 minutes or a day. But in that time he basically lived out this reality where he met a wife and had a child. Neither of which existed in real life. He experienced those events in what felt to him real time. One day, in this reality, he was sitting in his chair and noticed something odd about the lamp. He couldn't help but just stare at the lamp for hours and then days, which had his wife extremely worried. Eventually, after staring at the lamp for long enough, he woke up from his coma. He had to mourn the loss of his wife and young child, who were, to him, incredibly real and who he had known for what felt like years. It was a fantastic and sad story. Edit. It was kinda like he played a demo version of Roy. Obligatory. Never been in a coma myself. But I am a nurse who've worked ICU. I must say it really differs from person to person. Most people told me they don't remember a lot. Maybe some dreams or the last few seconds before the accident surgery. But I had a few patients who actually heard things happening in the ICU around them. Like someone could tell me quite personal details about one of the other nurses. Stuff she talked about with co-workers while caring for the patient. Or they remember the motion of being turned to different sides. Someone I met later told me she cannot stand smelling the body lotion scent we use there. If you can, avoid going in a urinal directly adjacent to one which is being used. Look straight ahead or slightly up when using a urinal. Obligatory. Not me, but my mom was in a coma for 6 months during my 9th grade year. She described it as being in hardcore dream-like state. Worst year of my life. IDK. I'll let you know when I finally wake up. I have a similar story. But it wasn't a coma. I was put under for removal of my wisdom teeth a few years back. My dream seemed like an entire year where the world was ending and all of my family was dying around me. Scavenging for food. Hunting animals. Sneaking through destroyed, car-littered streets. Finally made a safe house and saved a dog that I kept for a few months. The house was starting to get broken into when I woke up. I was only out for 34 minutes. I remember waking up and seeing my mom, who drove me there, and just started bawling. Happy she was still alive. The ride back home was so surreal. I was out for 10 days after being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 15 years ago. No memory of the coma, but I had a series of something between hallucinations and wild dreams during waking, which were oddly specific. Including being the writer of a novel called Salt and Cement about a woman buried in a large open cement shaft on a salt moving processing yard, which I played partially within the dream in a mild moment of inception. This actually raises an interesting philosophical question. Namely, what is time to the dead in dreaming? You hear many stories of dreaming or comatose people dreaming up 10 or 20 years of their lives without any knowledge of the real world and feeling every day go by despite every single one of them taking place within a short fraction of REM sleep in the middle of the night. The thing with dreaming though is that you wake up. There must be a break in that cycle. To a dying man, those last few moments before your brain shuts off and you cease to be a living human being could last an eternity. IDK. Just a thought. Horrible. When I woke up, 2 weeks after the coma, I could not remember anything. I forgot who my parents were and everything. I got a coma for freaking tripping over a rock and hitting my head on concrete. Like what? It felt horrible when I woke up. My head was all dizzy and my eyesight was barely working till a couple blinks. Now I never to go outside and run across my neighbor's driveway. Attempted suicide via overdose of antidepressant in my teens. It was weird because I started hearing voices and then I blacked out. Came back into consciousness and I was throwing up and hallucinating. I hallucinated that I threw up a bar of soap. Blacked out again, then I was being asked by the medics what I took. Blacked out a final time and woke up a week later. Trying to rip the ventilator tubes out of my throat. They sedated me and then I woke up groggy. No dreams. Nothing. Kinda makes me believe that once you die there is nothing but loss of consciousness. My biggest fear is that I'm still in a coma. And this is my dream. A motorcycle accident left me in a medically induced coma for about 2 weeks. I had weird dreams. I didn't know what had happened to me until I was woken up. I didn't know time had passed. I still remember the dreams. You must question your masculinity or purchasing habits if you can't bring all the bags in from the car in one trip. There are a few exceptions to this rule. If it didn't fit in the main part of the cart, it doesn't count as an extra trip. Things like large bags of pet food, large bags of rice, packages of water bottles, just buy reusable ones. Get a pass. Basically, if it took 2 hands to get it in the cart and doesn't fit in a bag, you are clear. If you have to use a flat cart in the store, you get a pass. Fragile items get a pass. If you had to put down your seats or couldn't close the trunk, you get a pass. My husband was in a coma for a few months. He said he didn't see a light or dead loved ones. He saw aliens. How scary is that? As a kid, I liked to climb things. We were in Key West on some random vacation when I was climbing the underside of our boat like a rock wall climber. I feel almost at the pinnacle of the tip of the boat. When my head hit the rocks, my vision turned into a static screen and my body was paralyzed. I was able to hear and was aware of what was going on, but my body wasn't responding to anything. I heard the crunch of rocks as my brother ran up and picked me up. The scream of my mom as the truck speeded toward the hospital. At that point the mind is fuzzy. I awoke with Mickey, Donald, and Goofy hand puppets. They released me back with the family and I spent the rest of the vacation on a fold-out lawn chair with wires glued to my chest and head. Half my childhood permanently disappeared. Can't remember anything. A friend of mine has had 2 comas. He was in a small plane when it crashed and he went out for a smoke and disappeared. Turned out we was run over by a motorcycle avoiding a car. I remember this really well because he was working for a client of mine. He was working late along. When his client came into the space, all of his stuff was on the desk. He was just gone. They called me out of the blue and asked if I knew where he was. He was in intensive care for 2 weeks. When he tells me of his experiences, he says he was flying through the sky over mountains, then past our planets and our solar system. He always tells me he can't wait to leave his bone cage and go back to traveling through the galaxy. It was the most beautiful experience he ever had. Luckily I have never been in one. My younger brother has when he was like 3 years old. The only thing he remembers is the time before he came back. Kind of creepy. Anyhow, I was just watching videos about that the other day on YouTube. Some people that last years in a coma say they remember people who were there being part of their life all those years. They even said they held a job, had a normal life, and when they wake up, they mourn the loss of those people because everything seemed so real. I wonder if people just go to another dimension while in a coma. It's creepy but fascinating at the same time. I dreamed all my nurses were lesbian biker chicks who were trying to rape me. Later on I realized they were just trying to get a catheter in me. By the way, I have nothing against lesbians or biker chicks. Just had a diseased brain at the time. I was supposed to not wake up at the morgue. Well, that was the plan anyway. To rid this planet of human waste if space that I thought I was. When I opened my eyes, I was amazed that I was conscious in the afterlife. I felt like I was disconnected from a physical body. Like waking from a huge sleep. I started wondering if maybe my human life had just been a big dream. Then my eyes focused and I realized I was staring up at a hospital room ceiling. Curiously, instead of being sad, I was relieved I was still alive. I realized I made a huge mistake. I thought I didn't want to live anymore. Turns out I just didn't want to live that way anymore. I was so messed up on alcohol and other things that I didn't see the option of change. I realized that I forfeited my right to live my life my way, so I started living like everything is lent to me. I finally found tranquility, happiness, strength and purpose. I like to think that I've been blessed with 2 lives and that I started living my second life the moment I realized I only have one. I'll be deleting this comment. I don't normally out this out there publicly. Disorienting. I was out for 2 days when I was 11 years old. A literal diabetic coma. It's how I was diagnosed. I have flashes of being surrounded by a flurry of nurses and doctors and then nothing. I woke up in the ICU. Confused. I remember not being surprised when I heard the diagnosis. It felt I already knew somehow. I thought that was it until I spoke with my mom recently. I mentioned the boy in the ICU bed across from me. How vividly I remember his constant screaming that first day. Soon replaced by very poignant silence. My mom said she recalled, but I shouldn't. He was there when I first entered the ICU but was gone long before I came to after the second day. To be fair though, I had started hallucinating shortly before slipping into the coma. So maybe I just dreamed it. The crazy part though is I can physically see him in my memory and the description matches what mom remembered. Brains are weird. Asked my friend, who was in an induced coma for 2 weeks after a car accident. His response: how the fuck should I know? I was in a coma. I'm not sure what I expected. I remember everything up until I woke up in a hospital bed with my mom and best friend holding my hands. I think about what would have happened had I not been wearing my seatbelt. Buckle up, kids. Medically induced one for 5 or 6 days after they fucked up a surgery. Apparently I'm quite resistant to anesthesia and whatever they use during coma. Because I never was very deeply away. My mom said I twitched when door slammed shut somewhere. Also I remember waking up for a couple of seconds when a doc visited me. In the end they woke me up from the coma after I somehow woke up and pulled the breathing tube out of my throat. I can't remember that part. But I remember docs looking very concerned when I came by and I had a breathing mask on. The time between basically was like sleeping. I remember very faint dreams and a voice saying we did everything. He'll have to fight this fight from now. I had pneumonia and sepsis. The time afterwards was weirder. The brain really doesn't like the time gap and a couple of days afterwards are quite a bit of jumbled mess in my memory. My sister was in a coma for over a month from a car accident. She was asleep in the back seat on a road trip and her friend flipped the car on the freeway, trying to avoid something on the road by swerving. But in a panic she hit the gas instead of the brake. She had a bruise on her brain which was kinda like her being mentally handicapped, but each day she got better. Now she's completely recovered and back to normal. When she woke up she told us she had a dream where some mystery guy shot her and that's what she thought happened with no recollection of the car accident. The first time I was in a coma. They didn't tell me. I thought it was just another normal wake up. It was actually months before anyone told me. I couldn't understand all the fuss and feeding tubes. The second one. As I was coming out of it. I remember them asking me the date over and over. I kept saying 19. And they'd stop me and ask me to try again. I remember having really vivid dreams and being surprised it was August. Last I knew it was 4th of July. I woke a month. And with one less toe. Later. I was very young. Like 8 years old or something. I had a very serious allergy which affected my breathing and I felt the worst an 8-year-old could ever feel. My legs were killing me to the point where I could barely walk. My dad went full speed in the car to the hospital where when I got out of the car I immediately passed out in his arms. He carried me into the ER. I didn't remember anything. Later I woke up to see my dad telling me, "Everything is gonna be alright," and I panicked because I could feel my body and stuttered the words. What's wrong with me? Last thing I remembered was when one of the doctors stuck a needle into my leg. I didn't feel anything and at the time it looked like he stabbed me. I panicked and just blacked out. I ended up waking up in the morning the next day in my bed. Forgot about the entire thing and only remembered my dad's crazy driving skills on the way to the hospital. Later on over the months I started to recall what happened at the times I was awake. I was effectively kept in one for the night after having my appendix removed. The thing burst once they removed it. Dreamt I was swimming in a giant swimming pool on the moon. I remember so distinctly because I noticed my breathing felt very heavy. I also was breathing underwater. After I woke it weirded me out for a couple of days. The first time I went to a pool after felt odd. Not me, but my cousin. Went into a diabetic coma in high school in his sleep. While having a nightmare. He was out 2 weeks. Said the entire time was a nightmare. When he woke up, he hallucinated the nurse checking on him to be stappling his fingers together. So he slapped her and screamed, "Who the fuck are you?" Then the nurse walked out of the room and said he's awake. Does anyone know what happens if you're in a coma for a year or more? Does it go by fast as if you were sleeping? I was hit by a speeding delivery van and spent 2 weeks in a coma. I learned how to hunt giant bugs. I can't imagine. I'm on the other side. I'm a nurse. Sometimes I feel bad because I think to myself it might be better that this patient doesn't wake up. I've just seen what comes after. And we also mourn with 4-hour patients. Not just while you're with us, but years after. It's strange to know that in some parallel fashion we are experiencing some of the same feelings from 2 totally different perspectives. I don't remember anything while being in a coma. But somehow I remember the line between coma and sleep, as I would call it, when I was waking up. I felt like I was nowhere. Like there was nothing. I didn't exist. Then suddenly I saw blackness. I couldn't still see anything as I was in sleep. But I remember that my consciousness came back. Or that's how it felt. Then I saw black and some hallucinations of scary faces right in front of my face. Like millimeters away from my face, but I was still able to see the whole face of this creature. I remember it being scary as anything. But there was a line being nowhere and being sort of like in a sleep. If a bro calls you unexpectedly, puts you on speakerphone. Second-hand knowledge. My father was in a coma for 6 weeks after a traumatic brain injury. He said he could hear what people were saying, but that he felt like he was in a dream and would often think he was driving truck. He was a trucker and said it was like being asleep. Medically induced for 5 days after falling 70 feet and breaking my spine. The passage of time is an infinite black hole. Seconds felt like days. I lived and died a lifetime in those 5 days. I hallucinated events that never happened. I relived the terror that put me there in an endless loop. I fell millions of miles during my 5 days of forever. And I know during my coma it was all dream time. But the semi-conscious time where I heard the endless beeps of the machines and the ghostly voices of the fully conscious that are out of reach made me feel so far away and so unbelievably lonely. You might meet God. Or invent him. Or kill him. And still your world is black. But that was almost 30 years ago. And those memories are so distant they hardly even feel like they were mine. Fucking weird. I was out for 9 days. Coma dreams are intense. Coming back from it was super strange too. A lot of questioning reality. Unfortunately not all guys follow this. But they all should. No talking in the bathroom. The last thing in the world I want to do while I have my dick out is engage in pointless pleasantries with you. Wake up. Not me but my cousin, like 12 years old. Cracked the front of her skull earlier this year on a dirt bike or some shit with her crackhead ass mom. She got a helicopter ride to the hospital and went into emergency surgery where she luckily pulled through. But due to swelling they put her in a medically induced coma, and when I asked her about it she said that she only knew what was real and what was dreams from the stories she heard. She was only out for like 2 days, but she said it was hard to distinguish between what was being dreamt and what she recalls from actually being awake during her coma. Big napper. No dreams. Only nap. I don't know how long I was asleep for. I do remember I was getting a blood transfusion when I woke up. I was so fucking excited about it for some reason. I vividly remember beaming ear to ear at the nurse, softly cooing like a baby to her. It's a blood party. I'm so happy I was invited. In 2003, I had a massive asthma attack. It was so bad. I couldn't move and my bladder released on its own. The last thing I remember was someone in the ER asking how do we get her shirt off and someone else saying cut it off. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in ICU with a bunch of tubes in me. I just wanted to watch my soap opera. It was right where I left it, so I didn't think anything of it. My mom and pastor kept talking about what a difficult week it had been. I had no idea what they meant. I started to get suspicious. So I asked my mom what day it was, and she replied, Tuesday. I did recall that I had come into the ER late on a Tuesday. So I asked her how it could still be Tuesday. She answered, no, honey, it's next Tuesday. I thought I had just passed out in the ER. Nope. Intubation and medically induced coma. The reason my soap opera was right where I left it? Because the space shuttle Columbia had exploded while I was out. I even watched a memorial service for it, thinking how sad it was. Took me a couple of days to realize I had no idea what had happened. Never experienced firsthand. But guy in our drinking group, Tom, got in a bad car wreck on his way home from work one night. Badly busted up and put into a medically induced coma for a couple days. He never mentioned anything about dreams. Just that after he woke up he thought he'd been out for years and tried to escape the hospital, twice. My son was in a light coma for 12 hours after falling out of a tree when he was 8. He's 20 now and has had conversations in his head with someone named Jeffrey ever since the accident. Recently diagnosed with bipolar II disorder with schizophrenic episodes. It was as real as every single day of my life and I have vivid memories of it all. Took a while to be able to differentiate between what was real and what was in the coma dream state. I was in a medically induced coma for just under 30 days in March-April of 2016. Gallbladder surgery gone awry and ended up with septic shock. 10 abdominal intestinal surgeries which ended in an ileostomy, tracheotomy and PICC line for over a year. 0/10 recommended. I remember enhanced dreams, subconscious thoughts that were triggered by discussions around me while I was out. Remember trying to communicate and ask my family about pets they talked about. News stories on TV. DR. Discussions etc. I took those bits of info and turned them into full-blown situations I was in. I woke up without being able to talk or sit up. But I am told I woke up over many days as they weaned off the drugs. But my first true recollection I was about a month in. Reversal and hernia reconstruction went much better with a different doctor almost exactly a year to the week of my initial surgery. If a guy's having a breakdown you're ask. I don't remember a single thing. I woke up and felt as if no time had passed. WTF, how is it June? In a coma for 6 weeks. It was like a long, restless nap. I had some weird, vivid dreams. And when I woke up, I knew time had passes. I thought I was out for 2 or 3 days. But was genuinely shocked to find that it was 42. All in all, though, it just felt like sleeping. But I felt exhausted when I woke up. I got in a car accident in 2016. No head trauma, thank God, but I was in and out of consciousness for about a week. I have 3 memories and flashes of asking for water about 1 trillion times. The 3 memories were my friend Rosa coming to see me. I think I woke up for like a minute and went back to oblivion. Waking up and having a tingling feeling. I fractured 4 or 5 vertebrae and had a burst fracture on my L4 in my right leg. Notifying my mom or dad, honestly don't remember, who then got a doctor who promptly told everyone to leave, then I was back out again. Bitching to my parents about one specific nurse who I blamed for not letting me have water in my haze of drugs. Edit. 4. I remember signing some paperwork before going into the first spinal surgery. Release forms and a DNR. My son was in a medically induced coma for 11 days following an accident. He remembers nothing of those 12 days. And the 2 weeks following are still hazy after 4 years. He was struck by a speeding car while skateboarding. He suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. Jaw broken in 4 places. Molars knocked clean out of their sockets. Broken clavicle. Rib. Pelvis. Ruptured spleen. Carotid arteries nearly ruptured. Needed a chest as well as a pec, feeding, tube. I'm grateful he has no recollection of any of this. I was put into a medically induced coma for a week after I got my shit rocked in a crash. It sucked balls. 1. I could hear what was going on, but had 0 ways to communicate. 2. The hallucinations nightmares was really fucked. But that's too expected from anyone who goes into a coma due to a traumatic event. And 3. I couldn't tell what was real and what was a dream for a very long time. And still have moments where I have loud and severe auditory hallucinations that convince me I'm back in my non-consensual nap time. Also, something that isn't well known is, after an extended period of strong as shit meds and not moving, besides when the nurses roll you like a Cali roll, your muscles forget how to work. It took me about a month of rehab to get enough strength to lift a large cup of water. But it was absolutely necessary. And although it was scary as shit, I survived my lower than 10% survival chance thanks to, and the fucking amazing, strong, and caring nurses and specialists. I was able to return to my babies. And my future husband. Still. 0/10 would not recommend. Like and subscribe if you want to.